Part 1. What began as an ordinary film premiere, with flashing cameras, polite smiles, and familiar faces on a red carpet, unexpectedly turned into something far bigger than cinema. At first glance, it looked like just another evening dedicated to entertainment, another seasonal movie meant to distract, comfort, and gently reassure an audience tired of heavy thoughts. Yet behind the practiced phrases and routine questions, something subtle happened. Something that many noticed only later, when the reaction turned out to be louder than the words themselves. A few short remarks, spoken calmly and without dramatic emphasis, suddenly ignited a storm that spread far beyond the film industry and reached deep into politics, public sentiment, and the uneasy atmosphere of the country. At the center of this story is a figure known to almost everyone, someone whose voice, humor, and screen presence have accompanied viewers for decades. An actor whose image has long been associated with irony, warmth, and a certain everyday honesty. Nothing in his appearance that evening suggested confrontation. There were no sharp statements, no raised tone, no direct accusations. And yet, within hours, his name began to circulate across social networks, messaging channels, and political discussions, framed not as part of a cultural event, but as a symbol of something far more sensitive. What makes this situation especially intriguing is that the initial reaction did not come from ordinary viewers leaving the cinema or critics discussing the quality of the film. It came from a completely different sphere. Suddenly, official letters, public appeals, and emotionally charged commentaries appeared, all referring to the same brief exchange with journalists. The words themselves were simple, almost mundane, the kind that might normally dissolve into the background noise of celebrity interviews. But this time, they did not disappear. Instead, they were amplified, interpreted, reinterpreted, and loaded with meanings that went far beyond their original context. Why did these remarks resonate so strongly? Why did they trigger such a sharp response from voices that usually focus on entirely different matters? And how did a discussion about cinema quietly transform into a debate about loyalty, responsibility, and the boundaries of acceptable speech? These questions hang in the air, unanswered, pulling the audience deeper into the story. There is also another layer here, less obvious but no less important. This is not just about one person or one comment. It is about a growing tension between what people feel privately and what they are expected to say publicly. About the thin line separating everyday fatigue from statements that are suddenly perceived as symbolic or even dangerous. About how cultural figures, even when they try to speak carefully and softly, can find themselves at the center of conflicts they never openly declared. As the discussion grew, it became clear that this was no longer a fleeting scandal. It was a mirror, reflecting deeper frustrations, unspoken fears, and a collective sensitivity that reacts instantly to the slightest deviation from an approved tone. The film itself almost faded into the background, becoming merely a pretext. What truly mattered was the reaction, the speed with which it escalated, and the eagerness of certain voices to turn a moment of casual conversation into a matter of national importance. Before we go any further, it is worth pausing and asking, was this really about a movie? Or was the movie just the spark that ignited something that had been building up for a long time? In the next part, we will carefully unfold what exactly was said, who responded, and why these few sentences suddenly carried so much weight. Stay with us, subscribe to the channel, and do not miss what comes next, because the real essence of this story is only beginning to reveal itself. Part 2. The essence of this story becomes clear once we return to the very moment that triggered everything. It happened during the premiere of the film Yolki 12, a continuation of a long-running and commercially successful franchise that has traditionally positioned itself as light, comforting, and deliberately distant from harsh realities. During a routine conversation with journalists, the actor Dmitry Nagiev was asked a standard question about the reasons behind the enduring popularity of the series, and about what, in his view, attracts viewers today. His answer sounded restrained, almost weary. He said that there are now many films about the war, that people are tired, that there is a sense of grayness and dirt, and that this particular film offers an illusion of a peaceful, happy life. Later in the same exchange, when asked about personal adventures and bright moments, he responded with a rhetorical question, pointing out that it is difficult to talk about personal excitement when a war has been going on for years. He used the word war openly, without euphemisms, without slogans, without calls, simply as a statement of fact. From a neutral point of view, these words were neither radical nor aggressive. There was no direct criticism of the authorities, no calls for action, no explicit political demands. Yet the reaction that followed was immediate and intense. A deputy of the Kursk Regional Duma from the United Russia Party, Dmitry Nagiev, publicly announced that he was appealing to the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Culture with a request to assess Nagiev's statements. According to the deputy, residents of the Kursk region, including participants of the special military operation, were allegedly offended by the actor's words. Nagiev claimed that the remarks discredited the ongoing events and that Nagiev himself spends a significant amount of time outside Russia, which, in his view, further aggravated the situation. He also recalled that in 2022, the actor had expressed positions that could be interpreted as critical of the Russian authorities. This appeal became the formal starting point of the scandal. Almost instantly, pro-government Telegram channels picked up the story, each adding its own interpretation, tone, and emotional coloring. Some accused Nagiev of hypocrisy, stating that he criticizes reality while continuing to earn money in Russia. Others framed the situation as a moral betrayal, emphasizing his comfortable life abroad and contrasting it with the hardships faced by people in the regions. The fact that the discussion revolved around films, fatigue, and atmosphere did not matter anymore. The narrative shifted toward loyalty, patriotism, and the right to speak at all. The argument that particularly fueled anger was Nagiev's mention of illusion. For many commentators, this word became a trigger. They interpreted it as contempt for the audience, as if the actor were mocking viewers who seek comfort in familiar stories. The idea that entertainment could serve as an escape was suddenly presented as something almost shameful. The accusation was simple and repeated endlessly. If you are tired, you have no right to say so. If you create entertainment, it must serve a clearly defined ideological purpose. At the same time, references to the Kursk region appeared repeatedly in official rhetoric. The deputy insisted that residents there were outraged, yet no concrete statements from these residents were presented. What is known publicly is that the Kursk region has faced serious social and economic challenges, including protests related to compensation payments for people unable to return to their homes. These issues, however, rarely receive the same level of attention from officials as a celebrity's words at a film premiere. This contrast only deepened the sense that the outrage was selective and politically convenient. The media ecosystem reacted predictably. Headlines appeared accusing the actor of being disconnected from reality, of living in Dubai, of returning to Russia only for profitable projects. His past career was dissected, his roles mocked, his personal income discussed in detail. Numbers were cited, sometimes without verification, sometimes exaggerated, all to reinforce the image of a wealthy figure supposedly indifferent to ordinary people. At the same time, calls were made to limit his participation in projects financed from the state budget, and even to consider recognizing him as a foreign agent. What is important here is not just the criticism itself, but its scale and coordination. Within a very short time, multiple channels repeated the same talking points, often using similar wording. The story stopped being about one comment and turned into a demonstration of how quickly a public figure can be placed under pressure for deviating, even slightly, from an expected narrative. The use of the word war alone was enough to provoke outrage, despite the fact that millions of people use it privately every day. Meanwhile, the actor himself did not issue loud statements or lengthy explanations. There was no attempt to escalate the conflict from his side. His words remained on record exactly as they were spoken, calm and understated. This silence only added to the tension, allowing others to speak on his behalf or against him, filling the void with their own interpretations. Thus, the core of the news is not a hidden message or a secret agenda, but the reaction itself. A brief, almost casual remark revealed how fragile the public discourse has become, and how quickly cultural discussions can turn into political accusations. In the next part, we will look deeper into the broader context, the background of Dmitry Nagiev's career and connections, and why many believe that, despite the loud demands, this story may not end the way its initiators expect. Part 3. To fully understand why this story continues to attract so much attention, it is necessary to look beyond the immediate scandal and examine the broader background surrounding Dmitry Nagiev, his place in Russian popular culture, and the unspoken rules that now define public life. For many years, Nagiev has occupied a unique position. He is not a marginal figure, not an underground artist, and not someone who built his career on open political statements. On the contrary, his success was rooted in mass appeal, television, mainstream cinema, and a carefully constructed image that combined irony, distance, and a certain everyday relatability. This is precisely why his words resonated so strongly. They did not come from an outsider, but from someone deeply embedded in the system. Over the years, Nagiev became one of the most recognizable faces on Russian television, working with major channels and production companies. His long collaboration with Channel One, his participation in large-scale entertainment projects, and his role in commercially successful films made him part of what could be described as cultural infrastructure. When such a figure allows himself even mild, carefully phrased remarks that can be interpreted as emotional fatigue or skepticism, it is perceived not as an individual opinion, but as a signal. For some, it sounds like an echo of what many feel but rarely articulate publicly. This is why the reaction went far beyond cinema criticism. Pro-government commentators quickly reframed the discussion as a question of responsibility. They argued that artists who remain popular and well-paid have a moral obligation to reflect official narratives, especially during what they describe as a historically significant period. In this logic, neutrality itself becomes suspicious, and irony is treated as disrespect. Entertainment, according to this view, should not provide escape, but rather reinforcement of collective resolve. Any deviation from this expectation is labeled as weakness, or even disloyalty. At the same time, another, quieter reaction emerged among ordinary viewers. It was not always loud or visible in official media, but it was present in comments, private conversations, and viewership numbers. Many people recognized themselves in Nagiev's words about fatigue and grayness, not as a political statement, but as an emotional description of daily life. For these people, the scandal itself became evidence of a growing gap between official rhetoric and lived experience. The fact that such mild words could cause such a strong backlash only reinforced this perception. There is also an important historical and personal dimension that explains why calls to cancel Nagiev are unlikely to succeed. Publicly available information shows that his connections extend far beyond the entertainment industry. In the past, Russian media openly wrote about his sports background, his training in Sambo, and his early connections with influential figures, including Arkady Rottenberg, a businessman closely associated with Vladimir Putin. Stories about their shared training environment and early acquaintanceship were published in major newspapers long before the current climate. These details matter because they explain why, despite periodic criticism, Nagiev has repeatedly managed to return to major projects after periods of silence. In 2022, after posting content that many interpreted as critical of the events in Ukraine, he noticeably reduced his public presence. He disappeared from television screens, avoided interviews, and refrained from commentary. Officially, this was described as a long vacation. Unofficially, media insiders suggested that discussions were taking place behind closed doors and that influential figures intervened to prevent harsher consequences. By 2024, His gradual return to cinema and advertising signaled that a compromise had been reached. His participation in Yolki 12, a project associated with major media holdings, confirmed that he remained acceptable within certain boundaries. This context sheds light on why the current campaign against him appears paradoxical. On one hand, loud demands are made to restrict his work and label him as a foreign agent. On the other, he continues to receive roles in high-profile projects, appear in advertising campaigns, and attract audiences. This contradiction exposes a deeper truth. Public outrage does not always translate into real consequences, especially when it collides with economic interests and established networks. The discussion around war-themed cinema also deserves separate attention. While critics insist that such films are essential for shaping public consciousness, box office numbers and viewer engagement suggest a different reality. Many explicitly ideological projects have failed to attract significant audiences, despite heavy promotion. Meanwhile, films offering escapism, humor, or simple human stories continue to perform better. This does not necessarily indicate indifference, but rather emotional exhaustion. People may respect official narratives while still seeking relief from constant tension. In this sense, Nagiev's remark about illusion was not an insult, but an accurate description of the function entertainment has always served, especially in difficult times. Cinema, television, and music have historically provided moments of normality, even when reality felt overwhelming. Denying this function does not eliminate the need for it, it only pushes it into less visible spaces. As the noise around this story gradually settles, one question remains central. Who truly represents public demand? Is it the loudest voices in Telegram channels, or the millions who quietly choose what to watch and what to ignore? The fate of this scandal will likely be decided not in official offices, but in audience behavior. So far, that behavior suggests that people are more complex, more tired, and more thoughtful than the simplified images imposed on them. In the end, this story is not just about Dmitry Nagiev. It is about the boundaries of acceptable speech, the role of culture in times of pressure, and the growing distance between official expectations and private emotions. It is about how a few carefully chosen words can expose an entire system of sensitivities, fears, and contradictions. And it is about how, even in an atmosphere of control, reality continues to surface in the most unexpected places, sometimes in